family was wealthy. Okay. He was a Philadelphia industrialist. His family was very wealthy. And at the time of the 1850s, he was a very young man, but he was the manager of the Lehigh Zinc Works during this whole 1850 to 1860 period. And there's his timeline, 1826 to 1909. Enticed by the possibilities presented at the Lancaster County nickel mine, which he had heard of, by an exuberant Charles Dubell, Wharton began visiting the site over this entire period of time, and little by little buying up business shares from the principal owners, which was a compilation of several people, including a judge from Lancaster County. They were the owners in the early 1860s still. Dubell convinced Mr. Wharton that the workings would be successful based on his own experiences in Europe at a similar nickel type deposit. Nickel was the new enterprising metal to go after, useful in industry as a malleable, corrosion-resistant metal, and Wharton agreed. By 1863, he was the owner and operator of the property. The mistakes of the past period, from 1850 to 1860, were that no enterprise had been taken to sink deep enough shafts, which would later prove to expose the rich, pure millerite. Wharton took the gamble, and the gamble paid off. This is about Charles Dubell. I have him circled in the picture there. That's an actual photograph of him. Though a young man at the time, Dubell didn't doubt himself or his assertions that this was a nickel-rich geology. Not enough could ever be said about this man. Dubell's positivity provided Wharton with incentive to operate at large. From 1863 to 1893, Dubell served as the mine manager, which encompassed the entire 30 years of the mining operation. In later years, Dubell became a public speaker about the Gap nickel mine. In 1898, a Philadelphia reporter took down and published Dubell's entire speech at a Philadelphia church. Dubell had become a celebrity, and I actually have that speech on a PDF file in my library. The three principal ores that I have listed here, and you can see them, can all be collected down there. Pentlandite, which is right on the top, is an iron, copper, manganese, cobalt ore with sulfur abiding, a lot of sulfur in that ore. And there is a lot of sulfur in these two other ores down there. Pyrrhotite, also an iron, copper, manganese, cobalt ore, is to the right. That's the one that we collected for the mineral boxes and the most prevalent ore down there. And millerite, off to the left side facing, is mostly pure nickel ore. If it hadn't been for the millerite, nothing would have ever happened down there. It's the only ore that had enough nickel ore to provide a commercial basis for the property. And if you look at the picture, the banding at the top to the left is that 2/3 of the rock. That's the nickel bands right there. The two burns, excesses of sulfur that were present in the ore had to be eliminated. The first burn in the kilns on the site provided for this. Impurities of this type were easily burned out. Using flux limestone from the immediate vicinity, a second hotter burn was conducted also on site. These longer, cleaner burns melted together and melted the metals together, and most of the impurities out as slag. Tons and tons of slag resulted on this site. Limestone, as flux, burns as a result of being comprised of once living material, calcium and carbon. Operations on site. Mining went on for the entire 30 years from 1863 to 1893. Ore was cobbed and stockpiled, often for 1, 2, or more years worth of processing. 12 shafts were struck in this close proximity. Solid veins of millerite were found and followed in plunging veins of 4 feet thickness or thicker. Shafts plunged from 50 to 250 feet down, and tons of ore came out. For years and years, the mine thrived. Operations in New Jersey. Final processing of the nickel ore occurred in Camden, New Jersey. Originally begun by the 1850s principal owners, Wharton rebuilt the Camden facility to accommodate and process the nickel ore more quickly and efficiently. Here, nickel ore melt was pulverized to powder, suspended in wet chemical mixture of arsenic to attach nickel to a float and remove it. Most of the refined nickel went to the industrial plant for the U.S. Mint to be used for coinage, other to industry. Transporting of nickel ore was done by wagon and later by train from Lancaster to New Jersey, which is only about 65 miles. This was the rock crusher on the site circa 1924, and somebody really didn't focus their camera really well, but we actually have pictures. So with the prevalence of cameras, especially by this time, before all these buildings were dismantled, we actually have some good pictures. This is not a good one, but at least we have it of the operations at the nickel mine. This is a much better picture. This is a picture again from the 1920s, long after the 30-year stretch of heavy-duty mining. That's a much better picture. That's what it looked like down there, which is now woods now. Pure millerite. Photo is a 4-inch piece of pure nickel bonded on a matrix composed of hornblende, iron, copper, and other metals. It was only because of this rich metal that mining became so successful. And this is a piece that I have. And this piece right here, you can see that's about a 1-inch band of millerite. But they claim that in the mine, and there had to be, there were some 4 or 4.5 foot bands. And that's an amazing amount of metal. Okay, a penny made with nickel for your thoughts. Nickel was first used in the U.S. coins beginning in 1857 with the Flying Eagle 1-cent penny, which had a 12.5% nickel content. That's one of my pennies. I'm a coin collector too. Using nickel in coin production became the new standard to lessen the hoarding of gold and silver coins that was going on at the time. As a malleable metal that was corrosion resistant, nickel was an excellent resource for currency. This nickel content was used until 1864, just a small amount that was in these pennies when the Civil War was winding down and victory was at hand. At the approach of the end of the Civil War, 1864 to 5, 1-cent coins were made mostly of copper with a little zinc. Nickel was for a short time scarce. The mine gets going. This has taken us back a step. Having bought up all the shares of stock from the 1850s nickel mine operation, Joseph Wharton by 1863 wasted no time in establishing his enterprise, meaning he went full scale into sinking shafts and finding out whether or not he had something special. He did. Early on millerite, the principal nickel ore, was discovered in seams 4 feet to 6 feet wide in several shafts plunging downward. With the future in mind, Wharton stockpiled a hefty supply of cobbed and smelted ore. The Camden, New Jersey processing plant was refurbished and ready to allow increased ongoing production. It had started, it was only a shed. By 1865, Wharton had tons of already processed nickel. He had an idea in mind. Wharton resided in Philadelphia and no doubt hobnobbed with the elite members of society, including senior executives from the mint. As a man of means, Wharton was listened to. Inveigling officials with the offer of enough nickel to last for years, he was successful in having the Philadelphia Mint establish the new use of a new coin. By an act of Congress, May 16, 1866, the first 5-cent coins were to go into production. These bigger coins were made of 25% nickel metal, which pleased Wharton immensely. Over 250 million nickels made at the Philadelphia Mint were made with the nickel from Lancaster County, PA, from 1866 to 1893, when the mine went out of operation. The mine actually closed in 1891, but Wharton was always ahead of the game, and he had an extra couple years already cobbed and ready to process. Mining viability. One major advantage was that the Gap nickel mine location was close enough to what became the processing plant in New Jersey to make transport of the ore economical, about 60 miles. I think it's a little more than that. Another major advantage was that the Philadelphia Mint, the primary buyer of the refined nickel, was less than 10 miles away from the processing plant. The locality. This is an over-the-top drone view of the Gap nickel mine area, and the area of the mine is all that wooded section in there, especially from the middle point, where right in the middle you can see at the bottom a little island. That's the area where nothing will grow on because it's all metal ore into there, and everything else in the woods, there's drop shafts that there, and the woods grew up around them because the drop shafts don't have the metal on the top. The dirt's still there, but there's 12 shafts down there, and the big one that's 250 feet is a big pool of water, probably about 75 feet by 55 feet across, 75 feet long, and it is an immense hole that's now a lake. The 3-cent coin, we have to talk about the coinage because this was Wharton's idea to do this. In 1865, 3-cent coins used 25% nickel in their composition. However, once the 5-cent coin entered into commerce, 3-cent coin lost its popularity, with fewer and fewer being made until they were subsequently phased out in 1889. 3-cent coin's a pretty small coin. Wharton wanted more of his nickel used. Wharton wasn't satisfied with the smaller quantity of nickel being utilized in the production of the 3-cent coin. The 5-cent coin, however, was a bigger coin, which meant using larger quantities of his rich nickel resource. As a savvy entrepreneur, the bigger coin was literally more bang for the buck. That's one of my 3-cent pieces there. And that 3-cent piece the nickel came from the nickel mine too, in Lancaster County. Go ahead. Wharton's nickel, here it is. These are mine from my collection. 5-cent nickel was introduced in 1866 as a result of people hoarding coins during the Civil War due to their high silver and gold content. U.S. Mint produced 12 million 5-cent coins in the first year. Metal content, 75% copper, 25% nickel. Wharton was in with a win. By 1893, over 250 million of Wharton's nickel coins had been minted. This is one of the 1866s that I have. Okay, this is the other side of that same nickel. Squabbling from, you can see that, from the start. What else is new? From the start of the new coin's inception, congressmen squabbled over the design. Originally raised between the stars outlined the coin's reverse, this design lasted less than 1 year. So the one you're looking at is the one that only lasted about 10 months. By early 1867, the rays were removed because their intricate design wore down the minting equipment. Minus the rays, this design lasted until the coin was again remade. By 1883, the design incorporated a Liberty head, a verse, and a V on the reverse. These coins employed Wharton's nickel standard using 25% nickel ore. If you're going to be a coin collector, get the 1866 5-cent nickel. Even though they're all from the nickel down there, this one was only made for 10 months. This is the rare one. If it's in good condition, or actually very good, it's worth a lot of money. It took me a long time to find a good one to buy to use in the presentation. Tapped out. By 1890, efforts to continue nickel production in Lancaster County had been tapped out. Deeper shafts experienced water seepages, which could not be readily removed unless very expensive and time-consuming methods were used, steam engines. Seemingly, the ore was running out. Through the practice of maintaining about a 3-year supply in nickel, the ore was used until 1893. Seeing the end in sight, Wharton looked for and found other resources, most notably Sudbury, Ontario. Although he had this resource, Wharton didn't own the Sudbury mine, Difficulties ensued with supply and prices. The end of an era. This photo is from 1894, just when the 30-year Wharton operation was over. Considering its consolidated coverage, less than 20 acres of surface land, it was an intense operation. Definitely a gamble for Wharton in that he relinquished his position at the Lehigh Zinc Works as manager in favor of attempting to make it rich with an unknown amount of nickel to mine at the onset, but it definitely paid off. That's a good overview of the entire operation. And remember, every one of these pictures were taken after the operation was over, but before the buildings were dismantled or fell to ruin. "10 years of difficulty, then Inco." From the get-go of the Sudbury supply, Wharton experienced problems negotiating with the Canadian prospect. Then, by about 1900, other places in the world began mining nickel, Russia and New Caledonia. Joseph Wharton did what any wealthy industrialist would do. He formed his own international company to resource the world supply, Inco. With the financial backing of others, he capitalized on emerging supplies from around the world. His hold on the industry was the ability to economically purchase and process the nickel in New Jersey. Wharton legacies. Before he died, they began. Wharton School of Business. Wharton never objected to using his wealth to benefit his community. In 1881, he donated $100,000 to establish the first school of business in the USA, which is still there today. Swarthmore College, started by Wharton and his mother, Deborah, in 1864. Very early on in his business career, he served on the board of this college from 1870 until his death in 1909. And modest to the end. This is Joseph Wharton dedicated his life to making Pennsylvania a better place to live and work. He had a legacy of making the world a better place. Wharton developed the Bethlehem Iron Works, the Lehigh Zinc Company, as well as the Lancaster County Nickel Mine. A lifetime wasn't quite enough. But this simple tombstone marks Wharton's gravesite in Laurel Hill Cemetery in Philadelphia, which you can visit. And this is the grave of Captain Double. It's another bad picture. I have not gone down to take a better picture. I used the one that I had online, but this was the captain, and the captain was everything. And he was a celebrity for quite a while after the mine was over, that he would go out and be called upon. If he was alive today, he'd be doing a Zoom meeting of the Nickel War, and it wouldn't be me. When you resource his speech, which I have the entire speech, you find out everything. He leaves nothing out. It was pages long, and I have it. And he explains the burns and everything that happened on that site. So he really left a legacy in his speeches. Today at the mine. Since the end of the mining era, most of the original property is returned to farming. This includes outlying areas where mining structures and massive slag piles left over from burns were removed. Tons of slag were given away, with most used for road fill in the local area. The other half of the original mine property, however, can no longer be returned to farming and any other use. Old water-filled shafts dot the scantily wooded areas where the mine entrances once dotted the surface, and thick layers of mine rock lay strewn across stretches of the landscape. Mineral collecting at Gap Nickel Mine. This must be about 5 or 6 years ago. This is the Lancaster Club there. That's me in the front ground. One of the goals of mineral clubs is to get on the site and spend an afternoon engaged in attempting to collect the various minerals from the site's dump areas. Millerite, the prized nickel ore, can still be found in smaller vugs in the host rock, while the pyrrhotite and pentlandite are more plentiful. Hornblende crystals are also available. Is there more? One of the things I profess, especially about old mining sites prior to 1900, is the possibility that mostly due to water seepages before the use of electric power and other factors like proper funding and less than adequate machines, older mines might have productive life in them yet. Does the nickel mine in Bart Township too? It's been owned as a farm for over 100 years by the old order Amish. Neither those who believe in the possibility nor those who do not will ever find out. But that has nothing to do with believing. And that is the presentation. I got it within 2 minutes of 30, so we did pretty good. Um, for more information regarding the history and geology of the Gap Nickel Mine, or inviting me to be a guest speaker for this at your group, and there's my contact information there. I've spent 45 years on that property. As a club, we go down once a year, sometimes twice. And they're the owners of the property, the Eshes are pretty amiable. They want you to be careful. They only let you go down at certain times of the year because of the farming that goes on around it. But it is still accessible there. And one thing I tried to do about 4, 5, or 6 years ago, I talked to Aaron Esch initially, and then his son. And I said, the frontage of that property is just a little cornfield or whatever they happen to put in it that year along the road. I said to them, White Oak Road, I said, you guys could bulldoze that field out and put a building back there with, parking for 50 cars. You could make a little nickel museum back there and put in, an ice cream parlor too, and whatever else you want, because not everybody in his family will want to be in the building business that he has a pretty big contracting business. Because they reported that we get 8 to 10 million people in Lancaster County every year for tourists. I don't know if that's true or not. Sometimes it seems like it, but it wouldn't take many people to make a going concern of a museum there and everything that they could do. And since the site is still there and the dumps are back there, I mean, they do it in New Jersey at the zinc mines. Something to me could be done down there with so many tourists around. I tried to talk him into it. I was going to give him some money to be a partner in it. But either way, it would have been nice to see it. And it hasn't happened yet, but I was still working on the sun. Is that the end, Kathy, of the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, that was the end then. If anybody has any specific questions, they can ask.
Yeah, we have one question already. It was put in there early. Tony wants to know, was there any health issues for those involved in the mining?
Because of when it happened, there was no regulations at the time at all. This is the 1850s to the 1890s. So nothing would have ever happened that any regulators would have ever been involved in anything. That happened later. Good question, though. And Dubel never spoke about that. I'm sure people died in the mine. I'm sure that people got hurt, but no records were ever kept. And back at that time, you didn't have to have tax records. You didn't have to have liability records. This was a time when entrepreneurs were truly free to do whatever they wanted and how they wanted to do it. We have no record of it. Dubel was the only one who went around and talked about it. And he never spoke about people that got hurt.
Okay.
I'm sure that they were.
Here's a question. Besides
Tony also asked about, besides the coinage, what else was the nickel used for?
Well, down there, you're talking about coinage. That was like 95% of the usage from that mine. And all they do is mention that it went into plating. So machinery, whoever uses nickel ore for machinery, for plating, that would have been used, whatever there was back at that time. But since it was only 5%, it's nothing that I ever explored. Like, what were they exactly doing with other nickel? Because this was about the coins. It was 95% of the ore was used to make the nickels. Once the 3 cent was gone and they stopped using it in the pennies, it was all for the nickel. You figure 250 million nickels. If you see that as a pile, you understand how much metal there was down there. If it hadn't been for making the coins, I don't know that that Joseph Wharton would have endeavored to be involved in that mine. He had that idea from the beginning because he knew they were using it in the penny and the 3-cent coin just prior to him taking over that mine. So he knew it was happening, and he heard about the resource, and he capitalized on not what was happening, but what he thought could happen by talking to Dubel. It was Dubel that made all that happen. Wharton stepped in and he had all the money, but Dubel was the man who really made him interested in attempting to go after it, because you can't tell that from, you don't see millerite on the surface there. You get pentlandite and pyrrhotite, all the crappy minerals. You don't get the millerite on the top until you go down into the plunges. I wish the mine was open, the 250-foot, because I would have liked to have gone down that 250-foot shaft. Even now, that's like 20 stories down. I'd love to see it, but it's just water. I guess you could go down on a scuba gear. The openings are pretty big, so I guess somebody, no, I don't think anybody ever attempted that. That'd be interesting though, wouldn't it?
That'd be a scary dive.
I wouldn't do it.
I'll send Brittany down. Any other questions for Chris?
Hey, Chris, not so much a question, but a comment. This is interesting. I had ancestors that worked for the nickel mines back very early on, up probably into a couple of generations there. And one of these days, I always wanted to go down there and do some more searches. And maybe I'll look you up sometime next year.
Well, the Yeshes, if you were a part of a club and you have insurance, you can get a field trip down there. A lot of clubs do. It's not like you're going to find beautiful crystals. Not everybody wants metal ore.
No, I'm not interested in that. I'm more interested in just visiting, heritage wise, even just to see what's there.
What I always say about Lancaster County is so old that all the mining areas that we have here, which is the Woods Chrome Mine, the Peckway Silver Mine, which I worked at when I was a kid, and the Gap Nickel Mine in particular, and we have a zinc mine as well, Bamford Zinc Mine, that because of how long ago they were lost to history before anybody had the idea of let's take these places and let's do something with them for tourism mainly. That only really started in the 1920s when a woman's group did that to George Washington's home. They're still the ones that run that. That's not the government. And because these places were from so long ago, the buildings through rot and ruin, properties were sold, and there's nothing left of the heritage of any of those. And the chrome mine was the biggest chrome mine in the world at one time. And in the chrome district, the Woods mine was the mother lode. And the nickel mine, imagine that was the greatest source of nickel at the time for 30 years till New Caledonia came along. I think New Caledonia is still the world's leading nickel producer, and the government runs that. And the Peckway Silver Mine, it was a small deposit, but it had pretty rich silver in it. And there's nothing left except the silver mines preserved in a park now. But no, there's nothing left for real. And that's a sad, sad shame, because we would have had the workings at all them sites, and we could have seen a lot more if they had been preserved.
Yep, correct. I will add this story to this, what Chris said. Back in 2006, actually across the street from the nickel mine and just up the road a very, very short distance was Army schoolhouse. And in 2006, the Carl Roberts IV adult went into the schoolhouse and shot and killed 5 Amish children and injured 5 others, and of course made the world news. But the thing that gets me is that the Amish people did not show any revenge to what happened that night. The Amish actually went to the home where Carl Roberts lived with his mother, and they met with his mother, and they were very sympathetic to the events of the day.
And Aaron Esch's daughter was one of the ones killed, the owner of the property.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Oh, all right. Wow.
His family owned that school.
That's
They
cool.
built it on their property.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was one of his daughters that got killed. We don't talk to it when we go about it when we go down there. We tell people not to mention it to him.
Right. They don't want to talk about it.
I don't know whether they would or not, but it just doesn't seem right to bring that up anymore.
Yeah, they actually tore the schoolhouse down within
Yeah.
a couple of days and built a new one up the road further, sort of thing. But anyway, that's just a kind of a human interest story about what the Amish are all about, and even in a tragedy like that happened.
And in that place down there, the great thing is you get to actually meet and talk to them, and you get to interact with the Amish one-on-one, which is kind of cool unto itself.
Yep.
And Kathy wants me to plug our show. Can I plug the show?
Oh yeah, I wanted you to do that. Yes.
Okay. We're at Lancaster County Club. We have our big show every year, a 2-day show. Our new show that we put up this year is at the Farm and Home Center in July, the third week of July. We're going to be there next year too. But we have an end of the year show, which is a special show for the local community, just for one day. It's going to be this Saturday, November 6th, from 9 to 4:30. It's an indoor show, nice and warm and comfortable. Hot food served by the Paradise Lions Club.
No, the church.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is by the church. Paradise does our big show. I need Kathy here to keep me straight. So anybody, it's $3 to get in the show and $1 for kids. If you're under 6, I think you're free.
Yeah.